Some commentators have argued that the war on terror is like the war on drugs, a metaphor. In this episode of Perceptions on the Law, Professor Addicott pushes similes and metaphors aside to answer the question, are we at war? And it all starts right now.
A critical premise in any discussion on the war on terror, again, is whether we are at war. As I said before, if we're not at war, admittedly, we've done a lot of illegal activities, both under President Bush and under President Obama. If we are at war, we've really done nothing illegal. Our government has acted consistent with the rule of law called the law of war. So, who tells us if we're at war? Is it going to be a commentator from MSNBC? Is it going to be an editorial writer in the New York Times? Is it going to be a politician? And the answer, of course, is no. Or is it even going to be a law professor? No. The answer to that question must come from our government. We have three branches of our government, so let's examine all three branches to see whether or not they believe that we are at war, because that's where the answer lies. Obviously, the first branch we'll start with is the executive branch. When our founders created this nation, they created a system of checks and balances, as we all know. The executive branch is charged with the power to make war. The president is called the commander-in-chief. And by history and legislation and judicial judgments or rulings, we all know that the commander-in-chief, as the president, has the authority to make war. And again, that's checks and balances. Our founders gave the president the authority to be the commander-in-chief. They execute the laws. So the commander-in-chief can make war. In fact, in our history, the commander-in-chief has initiated many wars in our past. We're very warlike people. We've had over 100 wars in our history, minor and major. Many of those wars have simply been initiated by the commander-in-chief. For example, President Obama started a war with Libya not too long ago. He didn't ask Congress for permission. He used violence against the Libyan government, and he did that under his authority as the commander-in-chief. The second branch of government is Congress. It's true that Congress has not declared war in this war on terror, but they haven't declared war since World War II. In fact, in our history, they've only declared war in 5 of our wars. So by the logic of some, all the other wars after World War II would therefore be illegal, because the Korean War was not a declared war by Congress, the Vietnam War was not a declared war by Congress, the Gulf War was not a declared war in 1991, the war against Saddam Hussein in 2003, not a declared war, the war against the Taliban in 2001, not a declared war. The war in Panama, the war in Grenada. We've had a lot of wars since World War II. These aren't declared war. What Congress does is they authorize war. They authorize the president to do all necessary to use military force in a certain manner. And that's what they did in the war on terror. Following the attacks of 9/11, Congress passed the authorization for use of military force. And they said in that authorization that the president has the power to use the military against any person, organization, or nation responsible for 9/11. They authorized war. Congress also passed 2 authorizations associated with military commissions. One was called the Military Commissions Act of 2006. One was called the Military Commissions Act of 2009. You can't have military commissions unless you're at war. And in both of these Military Commissions Act, Congress actually identified the enemy quite clearly. 2006, they said that unlawful enemy combatants are Al-Qaeda, Taliban, and associated forces. In 2009, they called them enemy belligerents, illegal enemy belligerents, and named Al-Qaeda. So Congress, by passing these military commissions acts, listing who the enemy combatants are, they clearly believe that we're at war. And oh, by the way, they vote money, of course, for this war each and every time that they pass a budget. So Congress believes that we're at war. What about the third branch of government? That would be the judiciary. The Supreme Court has basically had 3 rulings on this war issue. The first was in 2004, and that was the Hamdi case. And in that case, the Supreme Court had to decide whether Hamdi, who was a U.S. citizen detained by President Bush as an enemy combatant, whether Hamdi was legally being detained by President Bush, whether he basically was an enemy combatant, or whether President Bush was acting illegally because this was not a war. It was a plurality opinion, 8-1. Justice O'Connor wrote, she said that the fact that we're at war, comma, doesn't give the president a blank check to do whatever he wants to do. Now notice that the court believed that we were at war, the fact that we're at war. But what the court has said in that case, and all subsequent cases, is look, we want some more due process for the enemy combatants. We recognize the fact that we're at war, but we want more due process. Why? Because these enemy combatants don't belong to a nation state. They don't wear uniforms. In fact, they come from many different nations. And generally when you capture one, their common phrase is that it wasn't me. So they use our freedoms against us. In 2006, the Supreme Court basically said that we want Congress to authorize military commissions, not the president. And in 2008, the Supreme Court said that you can detain individuals at Guantanamo Bay as enemy combatants indefinitely until the war is over, but we want a federal judge in Washington, D.C. to check the math. You have a right under habeas to have your status reviewed. If the federal judge says, yes, there's enough information that you're an enemy combatant, you remain in detention. The purpose of detention is not to punish you, but to keep you from rejoining enemy forces. So the point is, the Supreme Court has always recognized that we're at war. They simply added some more due process for the enemy combatants. We can kill Al-Qaeda on sight. We can detain Al-Qaeda indefinitely. And we can use military commissions to try them. If you're an enemy combatant, the full weight of the law of war can be brought to bear on these individuals. If you're not Al-Qaeda, we're forced to use domestic criminal law. And it's true that we have a lot of individuals that are infected with the virus of radical jihad. They're not Al-Qaeda, but they don't qualify as enemy combatants. Therefore, we have to use domestic criminal law, and we've prosecuted scores of individuals that fall into that category in our federal district court. So, bottom line is, we are at war. This is a real war, not a metaphor. To stay up to date on the latest news, be sure to like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter.